The story of the Admiral begins in a small town where a young boy takes his first step into life. This boy not only dreams of doing something great in his own life, but also holds hope of contributing to his country. His journey doesn't just lead to the battlefield, but marks the start of a path where he begins to understand his own leadership qualities and transforms his dreams into reality. The first step of this journey begins at a military academy where he receives his initial training and discipline. Initial training at the military academy. The Admiral's journey begins in a military academy where he has to polish his skills. This was a time when he learned the real principles of warfare from his mentor for the first time. The academy didn't only focus on physical strength training, but aimed to mold him into someone who would make decisions wisely. There, he realized that wars are not won by sheer force alone. They are won through decisions, thought, and leadership. During this time, the Admiral came to understand his own limitations and began preparing his mind for battle, challenges, and struggles. During his training, the Admiral faced many challenges. At times, he felt disgusted with the exhaustion of the training, while at other times, he doubted his decisions. However, these struggles were part of his journey. One day, when a member of his team hid because of a wrong decision made under his leadership, the Admiral realized that true leadership isn't about just giving orders. It's about building relationships with people, earning their trust, and assuring them in their decisions. This was the moment when he understood that if he wanted to guide his people, he needed to care for them, understand their personal needs, and build a team with them. The beginning of leadership. After the academy training, the Admiral tested his leadership skills for the first time with his team. In his first mission, he was just a young officer chasing his dreams. However, this mission instilled in him a new mindset and confidence. He understood that the real meaning of leadership is not just giving commands. It's about inspiring your team, motivating them, and navigating difficult situations with their help. His strategy and leadership during the mission transformed him into a real leader, and his team fully trusted his decisions. Emotional growth. During this early part of the Admiral's life, his emotional growth was also taking place. When he failed in training, he understood his humanity and his doubts. Each failure taught him a new way to learn. These challenges and emotional struggles made him a strong and resilient person who tried to solve every problem in his own way. This first section of the Admiral's journey highlights his early training, his first steps toward leadership, and his emotional growth. It lays a foundation for his future journey. After completing his training and proving his worth in the academy, the young officer, who would later be known as the Admiral, was given a chance to lead a significant mission. This mission was to test his skills as a leader, his ability to make difficult decisions, and most importantly, his courage in the face of uncertainty. The battle ahead was not just about strength. It was about strategy, resolve, and the trust that had been built between him and his crew. The call to leadership. The Admiral's first major challenge came sooner than expected. A crisis in a region required a decisive leader to guide an army into battle. The young officer, now entrusted with this responsibility, knew he could no longer be just a student or follower. His decisions would now determine the lives of many, and the weight of this responsibility was heavy. But he rose to the occasion, ready to prove that the training and lessons had prepared him for this moment. The tactical battle. The mission was clear, to protect the borders of his country from an invading force. But the enemy was well prepared and had resources that outmatched those of the young officer's army. The Admiral had to think quickly and use the lessons he learned in the academy to strategize and outmaneuver the stronger foe. The key to success wasn't in direct confrontation, but in using the terrain, the environment, and the morale of his troops to his advantage. During the battle, he used a combination of feints, diversions, and surprise tactics, which left the enemy confused and uncoordinated. His leadership was evident not just in the planning stages, but also in the execution, as he remained calm and calculated under fire, showing the soldiers that his leadership was trustworthy. The victory was not only a result of superior strategy, but also the unwavering belief his soldiers had in him. The young officer's first battle ended in a decisive victory, and it was in this moment that his reputation as a strong leader began to spread. Facing doubts and overcoming fear. Despite the victory, the Admiral faced doubts within himself. In the quiet moments after battle, he questioned whether his choices were truly the right ones, especially considering the lives lost on both sides. Was there another way? Was the cost of war too high? These questions haunted him, but he knew that doubts were part of leadership. What mattered now was learning from experience and preparing for the next challenge. The emotional weight of leadership was something the admiral had to continually face. He had to balance the love of his country and the people he was leading with the harsh realities of battle. He realized that being a leader didn't mean being fearless, but it meant being able to face fear and still move forward, making decisions for the greater good, becoming a symbol of hope. As the story of his victory spread, the admiral became more than just a leader on the battlefield. He became a symbol of hope for his people. His ability to turn the tide of battle with limited resources made him a beacon of inspiration. Soldiers, politicians, and common citizens alike began to look up to him as the embodiment of strength and resilience. The victory was not only a military achievement, but also a morale boost for the nation. The people had seen that someone capable of leading them through such difficult times had emerged, and they began to believe in the possibility of a better future. It wasn't just about military strength. It was about the power of leadership and the belief that a single person could change the course of history. After his initial success in battle, the admiral's reputation spread far and wide. Not only was he known for his exceptional leadership and military acumen, but his unwavering sense of duty and the humanity he exhibited even in times of war made him a standout figure. However, with prominence came a new set of challenges. The path he was about to take would not only shape his future, but the future of his entire nation. A shift in focus. In the months following his great victory, the admiral found himself confronted with a new dilemma. The people were beginning to look to him not just as a military leader, but as someone who could lead them through a time of political instability. The nation was at a crossroads. There had been great victories in battle, but there was also a growing concern about the long-term costs of warfare. The admiral's belief in peace began to take root. Despite his ability to lead troops in battle, he realized that leadership extended far beyond military strategy. He began to see that his true mission was to restore balance and peace, not just protect the borders of his nation. The admiral's vision shifted, and he started to view the battlefield as a means to an end, with that end being a more peaceful and prosperous future for his people. The pursuit of diplomacy. With this new focus in mind, the admiral sought to use his influence to broker peace with neighboring states. His success in battle had given him credibility, but he knew that peace could only be achieved if all sides were willing to compromise. At first, the prospect of peace was met with skepticism. Many of the old guard, including fellow military leaders and political figures, felt that peace talks were a sign of weakness. They believed that continued dominance in battle would ensure the future of the nation. But the admiral's reputation for wisdom and fairness had earned him respect even among his adversaries. He used his military experience as leverage, offering protection and security in exchange for diplomatic talks. He understood that lasting peace would require sacrifices on all sides, and he was willing to make those sacrifices for the greater good. The negotiations and the tensions of war. As the admiral pursued peace, the nation's enemies were not quick to let go of their animosity. The tensions between nations were palpable, and there were still factions within his own country who were ready to go to war at the slightest provocation. The admiral had to walk a fine line between maintaining his military strength and pursuing diplomacy. In the initial peace talks, there were moments when it seemed like all hope would be lost. But the admiral's calm demeanor and unwavering belief in diplomacy kept him focused. He approached each meeting with respect for the other leaders, listening to their grievances and offering compromises where he could. He had learned through his military experience that true strength was not in domination, but in understanding the perspectives of others. The victory of diplomacy. After months of careful negotiations, the admiral succeeded in bringing several of the region's warring factions to the table for peace. It wasn't a perfect agreement, and not everyone was satisfied with the terms, but it was a major step forward. The threat of full-scale war was finally lifted, and the admiral had earned the title of not just a military leader, but a peacemaker. However, peace was not without its own challenges. The admiral had to navigate the complexities of post-conflict recovery, addressing the needs of those affected by war, including displaced families, wounded soldiers, and the rebuilding of cities and infrastructure. Despite the peace, there were still elements within the country who opposed the changes. Seeing the peace as a betrayal of the hard-won victories in battle, a nation transformed. Through his efforts in diplomacy, the admiral had transformed the nation from one defined by its military might to one characterized by its commitment to peace and prosperity. His legacy was not just in the victories he had won on the battlefield, but in the hope he had brought to a people tired of war. The admiral had proven that true leadership was about balance, the ability to lead in times of conflict, but also the courage to seek peace when it was needed most. His rise to prominence had not been through sheer force alone, but through a deep understanding of the complexities of leadership and the vision for a better future. The admiral had learned that peace, while difficult to achieve, was the ultimate form of victory. As the admiral's influence continued to grow, so did the challenges that came with his newfound position. Despite the success of his peace efforts and the changes he had instilled in his nation, there were still formidable forces working against him. The balance he had worked so hard to achieve was fragile, and a final test of his leadership was on the horizon: the rise of new threats. The peace that the admiral had fought so hard to establish did not last indefinitely. While the peace agreement had quelled much of the unrest between nations, the stability of the region was still tenuous. Political factions within the admiral's own country, as well as emerging powers in neighboring regions, began to challenge the status quo. New threats arose not from the battlefield, but from the realm of intrigue and political maneuvering. Dissatisfied with the admiral's focus on diplomacy, several key political figures within the nation began to push for a return to the more traditional military ways. They believed that true security could only be assured through military dominance. On the international stage, a rising power, threatened by the admiral's growing influence, began to mobilize its own forces, preparing to destabilize the delicate peace. A time of difficult decisions. The admiral found himself at a crossroads once again. He had already made great strides toward creating a lasting peace, but now it seemed as though everything he had worked for was in jeopardy. He knew that war was a last resort, but the threat of conflict loomed large. In private moments, he questioned the decisions he had made. Had he been too idealistic in his pursuit of peace? Could he have taken a stronger stance against those who opposed his efforts? As the pressures mounted, the admiral found himself torn between his commitment to peace and his duty to defend the nation he had sworn to protect. In these moments of doubt, he turned to the wisdom he had gained through years of experience. He knew that the key to navigating this new challenge lay in his ability to adapt and evolve. He could not rely solely on the tactics of the past. He would have to find new ways to maintain peace without sacrificing the security of his people. A final showdown. The breaking point came when the rising power, in a bold move to challenge the admiral's leadership, initiated a series of border skirmishes, threatening to reignite full-scale war. This was the admiral's final challenge. He had to decide whether to engage in battle once more or use his diplomatic skills to prevent further escalation. Rather than immediately resorting to military force, the admiral called for one last peace summit, determined to resolve the crisis through diplomacy. He understood that this would be his most difficult negotiation yet, but he was prepared to give everything he had for peace. The summit was tense, with both sides heavily invested in their positions, and many believed that war was inevitable. However, the admiral's reputation as a leader of wisdom and fairness, combined with his personal commitment to the ideals of peace, allowed him to once again find common ground. Through patient dialogue, strategic compromises, and a deep understanding of human nature, the admiral managed to broker a peace agreement that avoided war and stabilized the region once more. The admiral's legacy. With the final threat neutralized and the peace agreement in place, the admiral's work was complete. He had achieved what many thought impossible. Not only had he led his nation to greatness through military victories, but he had secured a lasting peace that would endure for generations. His legacy was not one of conquering armies or military dominance, but one of wisdom, diplomacy, and an unwavering commitment to the greater good. As he looked back on his journey, the admiral realized that his greatest achievement was not in the battles he had fought, but in the lives he had touched. His leadership had inspired countless individuals to follow in his footsteps, to value peace over war, and understand that true strength comes from the ability to lead with compassion and foresight. A nation transformed. Under the admiral's guidance, the nation had evolved. What was once a military powerhouse, defined by its dominance on the battlefield, was now a beacon of peace and prosperity. The people had learned that military strength was only one aspect of true power, the ability to maintain peace, to heal the wounds of war, and to foster unity was the ultimate form of leadership. In his final years, the admiral retired from active duty, passing the torch to a new generation of leaders. His final words to his successors were simple: lead with your heart and always seek peace before conflict. True leadership is not in the victories you claim, but in the lives you change. The end of an era. The admiral's death marked the end of an era, but his influence continued to shape the course of history. His legacy lived on in the generations of leaders he inspired, in the lasting peace he had forged, and in the nation that had been transformed under his watch. As time passed, the admiral became a symbol not only of military excellence, but the possibility of a better world. A world where peace could be achieved even in the most difficult of times. And so, the admiral's story became a legend, a reminder to all that even in the most uncertain of times, one individual's courage, wisdom, and vision could change the world for the better.